One of the fun things about being a YouTube content creator is that when I am picking out pieces to explore as an illustration of some of the concepts that I like to talk about, it gives me an opportunity to almost revisit those pieces. Some of them I haven't looked at in many, many years. That's one of the neat things about having this type of hobby is that you can always go back and you're teleported to the time when you bought those pieces. This video is about my fourth quarterly update of 2025, and the reason I like these quarterly updates is because they also give me an opportunity to kind of go back and think about why I picked up some of these pieces, and I'd like to hear your opinion about these pieces also. If you're brand new to the channel, my name is Dub C, and I want to thank you for spending some time with me. Maybe you've caught a couple of my videos, maybe this is the first one. I'd like to encourage you to go ahead and click on that subscription button, become part of this community. Remember, it doesn't cost anything to subscribe to a channel, it's really just a way to show support. And if you're one of my returning subscribers, I'm looking to you guys. Which of these pieces that I picked up in the fourth quarter of 2025 do you think are the coolest, or do you not think any of them are good? I'm open to that possibility too. I know I have somewhat peculiar tastes when it comes to precious metals and rare coins. So if you are new to the channel, I like to begin my videos with a simple disclaimer. I am not a financial advisor. I'm not trying to offer you any kind of financial advice. I'm simply trying to share some of my experience having bought and sold precious metals and rare coins for the last 30 or 40 years. And I also like to begin my videos with a couple of concepts that we can kind of work back into the subject matter. I'm going to hit you with a couple of them. The first one is really simple, unless you are brand new to stacking. That's the concept of a silver round. What is a silver round? A silver round is a 1 ounce coin-shaped vehicle, usually for buying silver. So while this looks like a coin, you can see it's got a reeded edge. It's about the size of an American silver dollar. You can see it's got a date on it. This is actually made by a refinery, so it doesn't have a face value. It's not the kind of thing that you would spend, but coin-shaped objects are pretty inexpensive to make. So refineries often make 1 troy ounce silver rounds. We can see it actually says 1 troy ounce 999 fine silver right here. This is a very inexpensive, easy to understand, easy to buy and sell and to make 1 troy ounce silver bullion medallion. We have to call it a medallion or a medal of some kind because it's not technically a coin. That's a round. We'll talk about rounds a little bit later in this video. And the other concept I wanted to bounce off of you is the idea of a tola, that is T-O-L-A. The tola is a unit of measurement that's been used in the Indian subcontinent for hundreds and hundreds of years, and it's primarily used to measure precious metals. So we in the West, in the United States in particular, might measure our precious metals in troy ounces or in grams. In other parts of the world, they have used other weight systems, and in India, in particular, they used a weight system called a tola. A tola is about 0.375 of a troy ounce, or in terms of fractions, about 3/8 of a troy ounce, so not quite half of a troy ounce. This was standardized under British rule, and the tola is becoming less and less popular in India. Also, we've got lots of subscribers from India. You guys are welcome to chime in, but I think there's kind of been a movement to grams within that sphere also. But we'll talk about tolas a little bit later in this video also. So I'm going to go over some of the pieces, all of the pieces, frankly, that I've bought in the fourth quarter of 2025. We're going to start here on the left. We're going to work our way to the right, and these pieces are kind of grouped chronologically, but that just so happens to be kind of the way that I see them as being interesting, from the least interesting to the most interesting, something like that. And I'll go through this as quickly as I can, but I think this is a fun way to kind of explore where my mind is when I'm looking at pieces. I should emphasize that we are in almost unprecedented times right now, even since the last time I did a quarterly update. The price of silver, and to some extent the price of gold, is much, much higher than it had been. And it's kind of interesting to look at this from the perspective of new folks who are coming into this hobby. When they walk into a coin shop, if they found out that maybe they should consider putting some money into the precious metals market, when they see something like a silver round and it's selling for $60 or $70, that's just the way it is. But for those of us who have been doing this for a long time, even if you just go back a year or two, these same rounds would have cost you $25 or $30. So it's harder and harder for me to pull the trigger on pieces. I started beating a drum about a year ago about the concept of making your stack better and not just bigger. And I think that's especially true when we see the prices where they are now, especially for us old guys. It's harder and harder to pull the trigger on pieces that are just kind of average. I wind up looking for pieces that are exceptional. And oddly enough, I didn't find that many pieces. You'll also notice one more point is that there is zero gold here. I try to make a habit of buying gold whenever I find an interesting piece that I can put into the stack. You guys who saw last quarterly update saw a couple of small gold pieces. This time I just didn't find anything that was really moving me. Let's jump right into it. We're going to start over here on the left side. We already looked at these 1 ounce silver rounds. Why do I come to the table with these? In 2025, the major global refining conglomerate called PAMP decided that they were going to revive a classic refinery's name, that is Englehard. And this is kind of a divisive subject. There are people who collect Englehard pieces. Englehard, one of the most important refineries of the 1980s, kind of the beginning of consumer bullion, when people first started getting interested in buying bullion. But Englehard kind of went away. They shifted their business from consumer bullion to really industrial metals in about 1990, and they have all but disappeared from the financial precious metals market, unless you're talking about pieces that are kind of now vintage, and this has become a very hot area to collect. The idea of reviving a name that has already gone away means that people who are kind of new to this, or people who are dedicated Englehard collectors, might want to have a piece, but it also kind of almost waters down the brand to some folks. And I actually kind of include myself in that second group. To me, I would rather see something that was new and interesting from a new refinery, rather than reviving something that just doesn't have the bloodline of the original Englehard pieces. So we looked at this piece at the beginning of this video. This is called an Englehard prospector. This was one of the first really successful rounds. This piece is dated 1985. Englehard started making these in about 1982, and they became wildly successful until really probably the introduction of things like the American Silver Eagle. This was an easy way for people to buy 1 troy ounce of pure silver. So Englehard made about 75,000 of these every year from 1982-ish to about 1988. But then again, Englehard kind of went away. With the revived Englehard name, PAMP started releasing Englehard prospectors again. And I did a video about it. You'll find a link down below, but I went ahead and bought one of them just so I could kind of see what it was all about. And I have to admit that they did a pretty nice job. This Englehard prospector looks a lot like the slightly early versions of the American prospector that we see here, this 1985 dated piece. This one's got the big eagle on the back. They actually made a version that has the great big Englehard E on the back, and that's what this is supposed to depict. So they went with the more classic version of the American prospector. A 2025 dated piece. They did a pretty nice job of it. I wish that they'd use some kind of real graphic representation, if they were going to go this route, to show a piece that was a retro piece, that it is not really connected in the same way as the classic Englehard pieces. Interestingly, these pieces came at a pretty high premium. And now that these have been released, you are starting to see these appear on the secondary market, and they are being sold for a bit of a premium. I checked right before I started shooting, and it looks like the 2025 pieces from PAMP that have that Englehard name are selling in the $85 per ounce range. Now you have to include the fact that silver has gone up since these were first released, but still, that's a pretty hefty premium. Interesting. I wonder where these are going to go in the future. Do you love them? Do you hate them? Again, check out the video down below if you're interested in having a little bit of a deeper dive into those. The reason that it's on the far left is because even though I did buy it kind of in the last quarter of 2025, it wasn't something that I would normally pick up, but as a YouTuber, as a content creator, I pick up pieces like that once in a while when I think that they're interesting to our stacking community, and that's really what that piece was about. Plus, it gives me a chance to show off a really pretty roll of prospectors. You can't question that motive, right? Let's move into some of the pieces that really do excite me. In the fourth quarter of 2025, I was fortunate to find some interesting silver pieces that really are kind of in my wheelhouse. Let's start over here with the two smaller pieces. You're looking at some Spanish colonial small change. We might call these subsidiary pieces. The Spanish colonial silver pieces of the era were weighed and measured and spent in reales. That's what the silver pieces were. And the main coin from that series is the 8 reale. We'll talk about one of those in just a moment. But they also made smaller subsidiary pieces, all the way down to very, very small fractions. These are 2 reales. And these are really kind of what we would consider to be kind of a quarter in modern coinage. What we're looking at right now is a 1794 dated piece, and this one is actually from Lima, Peru. That's the Lima mint mark right there. You can see the small 2 in R, that's 2 reales. So we know what the denomination of this piece is. What do I like about this? I'll try to kind of tick out the reasons that I picked these pieces up and why I like them. First off, it's super cool, right? It's neat to have a piece of silver that's all the way from 1794. I've said many times before, when I'm looking at Spanish colonial and even other pieces from that era or a little bit later, I like these pieces to have a little bit of circulation. I take off my numismatist hat and I put on my historian hat. I love to have a connection with these pieces that circulated, that were an important part of people's lives. This piece is a great example of that, because not only is it worn, but we see that somebody has scratched something into the surface. Can you see that? It looks like it says JPI. In the numismatic field, we call that graffiti. It's not at all uncommon. People have been scratching initials and marks into coins going back thousands of years. It was kind of a way to show ownership. Maybe somebody was bored. Maybe it was a love token for somebody. We don't know exactly who did this and why they did it, but it's not uncommon, and it is a bit of a connection to the person that owned this piece 200 years ago, coming up on that. It's an interesting thing to see. I like these pieces. They're interesting. The Spanish colonial pieces are usually 89.6% pure silver, so these are close to our 90% silver pieces. The 2 reale pieces, 0.1949 of a troy ounce. So that's really close to about a fifth of a troy ounce. You can see why this would kind of be considered like the quarter compared to modern coinage. I picked up 2 of these. This is the other one. What do you notice about this one? It doesn't have graffiti on it, but it's got a hole all the way through it. Believe it or not, pockets are a relatively recent development. This is something that probably dates to the middle of the 19th century, 1850-ish. Before then, there weren't really pockets in clothing. People would have a coin purse or some kind of a bag that they would keep tied around their neck where it was not going to be stolen from them. Or sometimes, if they didn't have 2 coins to rub together, they might simply just put a hole in a coin. It wasn't so much the coin that people were spending, it was really the silver or the gold that people were spending. So by putting a hole in it, you weren't really detracting from the value, the face value, the commercial value of these pieces. This is a 1782 reale, and again, we can see that 2 reale mark there. You see the 2R. But this one is a Mexico City piece. Most of my Spanish colonial pieces wind up being from Mexico City. The Mexico City Mint, the oldest mint in the Americas, it dates back to the 1560s, I believe, something like that. Fascinating history, even with a hole in it, even with graffiti scratched in the surface, these pieces move, they tell me a story, and that's why I like these pieces. It doesn't hurt that these pieces are pretty inexpensive. I've got a couple of local dealers who sell these to me at not much over their melt value. How do you turn down something like that? Not something that you want to keep your powder dry for. In this case, back the truck up, I'll buy these pieces all day long. That leads me to the next bigger piece. Fortunate that I was able to pick up 3 Spanish colonial pieces this quarter. This is a 1798, I believe that's right. Yeah, there we see at the bottom. This is the 8 reale. So the Spanish colonial silver piece is on a base 8 system. Our own system is pretty much a base 10. We've got a dollar, we've got a dime, we've got a cent. These are based on 8, and that's why they are called pieces of 8. You used to actually cut these into smaller chunks when you needed small change. What do I like about this piece? The 8 reales are always going to be cool, right? It's got that pirate treasure, that sense of, hidden treasure, that kind of big chunky silver coin. It doesn't hurt the fact that this is from 1798. That's a pretty nice piece to own. But this piece was also, and you can see here it says 8R. That's how we know it's an 8 reale. Now, the fact that it's the size of a silver dollar doesn't hurt either. But you've got that Mexico City mint mark there too. This piece doesn't have graffiti and it doesn't have a hole in it, but what it does have are these marks all over the surface. Can you see those? We've talked about these marks on many occasions. This is a really interesting thing. Those are called chop marks. Those marks were made from a steel punch being hammered into the surface of the coin by Chinese merchants and bankers. These pieces were part of the Manila galleon trade that went from the west coast of the Americas across the Pacific Ocean to the Philippines and sometimes on to mainland China, where they were exchanged for import pieces, silks and porcelain and things like that, to go back to Europe. A fascinating part of our maritime history, of our colonial history too. So these pieces with these marks kind of proves a little bit of authenticity too. These made that 10,000-mile voyage under sail across dangerous seas to be traded in all sorts of exotic things. And then they made it back, and I was able to pick one up here in the Midwest of the United States. I love the 8 reales. I pick them up whenever I can find them. This piece was especially inexpensive. One of my dealers made me a great offer on it. I couldn't pass it up. I like this piece in particular because these chops seem to have been worn down a little bit. You can see that some of them are only almost indiscernible. Now, that happens sometimes. These pieces would have circulated for years and years and years, even after they made the trip back from the Orient, from Asia. But I think it's interesting sometimes we see bright, crisp chop marks. Those pieces probably didn't circulate much beyond when they first arrived. And these pieces that seem to have been passed around maybe for tens or 20 or 30 years after they returned, and they continued to wear down, definitely part of that coin's history. Really, really neat, right? Some interesting pieces. The final piece from what is now Mexico is this piece. Ordinarily, I would not pick up a piece that is this difficult to even make out. Can you tell what this is? I'll give you a hint if you can't make it out. This is a Mexican Republic 8 reale. After Mexico achieved their independence from Spain in 1821, they set up the Mexican Republic, and they continued to make these large-size silver coins. They continued to call them 8 reales, but they have this device on them that is the Phrygian cap, that is kind of a symbol of freedom, of freed slaves, borrowed from the Romans. We will see a Phrygian cap on our American circulating coins in 2026. An interesting development. Keep an eye out for that. So the Phrygian cap on technically the back of the coin. The front of the coin is the side of the Mexican pieces that has the state symbol of Mexico. This is technically the front of the coin, and that's an eagle with a snake in its mouth. So why did I buy this piece? Interesting. You can barely even discern what this piece is. You can see the back is just about as bad. We might say this is roached or hashed. It is such terrible condition. Ordinarily, I wouldn't even be attracted to a piece like this. You saw these pieces with graffiti and holes in them. This one is almost too far gone. Almost too far gone. I've got really nice examples of these pieces, but I didn't have a piece that was quite this bad. And believe it or not, that story was enough to sell me on this piece. Again, I didn't pay very much of a premium for it. We see some corrosion here. This is likely environmental damage. There was heavy PVC on this piece. I used a treatment to kind of arrest the PVC. I've done a 2-part video series on my technique for doing that. You'll find a link to that series down below if you're interested in it. But it does tell a story, and I could just make out what this piece was supposed to be. There's that 8R for 8 reale. You can see this symbol here. That's a mint mark. This mint mark actually corresponds to Guanajuato in Mexico. That's where this mint is located. And then we see the date down below, 183, and you can just barely make out a 6 right here. You see that 6? An 1836 8 reale from Guanajuato. Ordinarily, it's too far gone. I like having at least an example of this piece. I didn't want to see this piece be sent off to the smelter, so I went ahead and picked it up. Fortunately, I didn't pay very much for it. The only American coin that I bought this quarter is something that I've had before. You can see that there's kind of a theme to that. I do have some Spanish colonial subsidiary pieces. I'm working on my second roll of the 8 reales. I do have a couple of rolls now of the Mexican Republic 8 reales. And believe it or not, I'm working on, very slowly, a roll of the Columbian Exposition half dollars. The Columbian Expo was a huge world fair that happened in Chicago, and it was ostensibly the celebration of the 400th anniversary of Christopher Columbus discovering America, 1492 to 1892. So these were produced in 1892 and 1893 as their World's Fair went on, and this was a huge to-do. It happened in Chicago, Illinois. And it's just an interesting piece. Our first commemorative half dollar, the United States has continued to release commemorative half dollars up until the present time. This was the first one. We also released a quarter during the Columbian Expo. It was called the Isabella quarter. We don't do a lot of commemorative quarters, but that was the first commemorative quarter we did too. Why do I like this piece? It's just kind of a fun thing to stack, and frankly, when I find circulated examples of these, they rarely have a premium. I was able to buy this piece for essentially its silver value. So a neat piece of history. The front of this piece with this kind of scowling Christopher Columbus was actually designed by Charles Barber of the Barber coinage series. What is about the back of the coin? You can see one of his ships there and the globe he's circumnavigating, trying to get to the Americas. The back of this coin designed by Morgan of the Morgan dollar. I think that's kind of neat. This is a particularly dark coin. That's not unusual for pieces like this, but it's got really beautiful tone. We'll talk about tone in one of the upcoming pieces. I do like attractive tone if it looks natural and authentic. This certainly does. One of the ways that you grade this piece is by the lines on the sail. You can see that they are mostly discernible. So if I were to grade this piece, I don't know, I'd probably say this is maybe an AU 53. Interestingly, they were not that popular when they were released during the Columbian Exposition. They were sold with a small premium. People thought of them as an inexpensive souvenir. That was kind of the point. But as America entered a little bit more difficult economic times a few years later, these found their way into circulation. They weren't quite as interesting as a collectible when people needed to put food on the table. And also, because they weren't that successful at the Columbian Expo, a lot of them wound up just getting dumped into circulation towards the end of the expo, and they did see a little bit of circulation. So when I can find these pieces and they're circulated and they're not a premium on them, I'll go ahead and pick them up slowly over the last probably decade, maybe 15 years. Been working on a roll of these. Just a fun, interesting way to have 90% silver. You got to have that kind of thing that you check that box off every once in a while, right? Since we talked about originally the bullion pieces over here to coin pieces, let's go back to bullion pieces. You'll recall that at the very beginning of this video, I talked about the tola, this weight system. I am kind of fascinated by the weight systems used in other parts of the world for precious metals. It's always kind of an indication of something being a little bit more interesting, a little bit exotic. These pieces are no exception to that rule. There's something kind of interesting about these. What I'm talking about are these tiny, chunky little silver bricks. What do you think about that? What do we know about this piece? This is kind of fun. This is a beautiful piece of silver that was made in the middle of the 20th century. We're talking probably 1950 to 1960, something like that. And these were made in Bombay, India. Now that's Mumbai, India. But it just so happens that I've been stacking these. I've been trying to collect these for a couple of years now. This is an example of one of these in a NGC holder. This is graded MS61. There's a reason why I like the graded versions of these. What are these pieces? What we think happened with these, and if there's Indians in the house and you are familiar with these, if you remember these pieces, this was almost a placeholder, kind of almost a pawn shop kind of thing. If you are a middle-class Indian family back in the 1950s, you might have had a stack of these in the cupboard or the closet somewhere, and when you needed cash, you would take one of these to one of the participating banks, and you would exchange it for cash. And then when you had a little bit more money again, you were done paying whatever that bill was, you would simply go back to the bank and buy another one of these bars. So these bars are 5 tola. I'll actually try to see if I can get that in here. You see it at the very top right there, 5 tola. And they are very, very similar to our traditional silver bullion that we have in the States now, fine 999 silver, right? So this is kind of a traditional silver bar, but it is very interesting and kind of exotic looking. These bars came in 5 tola sizes. I've got an example of a 10 tola size. You can see this one says 10T up at the top, is slightly larger. Interesting, I bought these pieces in slabs because these pieces tended to be heavily cleaned. They were quite scarce 5 or 10 years ago. Now we're seeing kind of an influx on these. You can find these on eBay now, but a lot of them have been harshly cleaned. And when you think about it, that doesn't seem that unusual. You know, I'm constantly beating that drum that we don't clean coins, but a silver bar, if you had one of these back in the 50s or 60s, or maybe a little bit later, and you wanted it to look pretty, you might have cleaned it. So a lot of those pieces do exhibit cleaning. Coming from a numismatic background, it was important for me to have pieces that were slabbed that don't have an indication of cleaning. I think that just makes them a little bit more authentic. My local dealer, one of my local dealers, happened to have a couple of these sitting in a bag, and I'd never seen them at the local shop before. I thought that was a really cool thing. They were kind enough to sell these at a pretty good price, paid a little bit of a premium for them. But it's interesting to have pieces that are in slabs and pieces that are not in a slab. The idea that these would have been an early form of consumer bullion, where people could just take these, get cash, come back, use the money for whatever they needed, and then go back and buy them again. I think we can kind of learn from that, right? It's kind of neat to have that option. I know a lot of people use their precious metals in kind of that way. Frankly, if you are a collector of indigenous Native American jewelry, that's kind of the way that early Navajo and Hopi and Zuni tribe members would have used their silver jewelry, kind of the same way. It's kind of a neat thing, and I think we can learn a little bit like that. So I like these pieces because I've got examples, because they're so thick and chunky, because they tell an interesting story. That's just really cool, isn't it? And that's the reverse. It's interesting. This piece is brilliant uncirculated. This piece, though, was really what attracted me to it. And I talked about some of the toning on these pieces, but wait till you see this one. Check that out. The toning on this bar, and this is another 5 Tola bar, it's the exact same series. There are series of these bars, and some people do collect them by series. But that is just phenomenal. When I saw that, my jaw dropped. In fact, I made an Instagram post of this one using Dio's Rainbow in the Dark. Maybe that's where you've seen this before. If you don't, check out my Instagram page. I am at DubCCoins, and that is just a really exciting, beautiful piece. I've thought about having these slabbed by NGC, and the thing is about toned pieces. When you have something that's wildly toned, it almost looks too good to be true. You might want to have those pieces put into a third-party grader holder like the NGC pieces I showed earlier, because once it makes it into that holder, generally speaking, the numismatic or the stacking community will see that as authentic toning. We can artificially tone pieces, and artificially toned pieces are kind of the same as a heavily cleaned piece, in my opinion, and a lot of people who collect and stack. So to make it into a third-party graders and having that tone be kind of seen as authentic can really enhance the value of this piece. It might be worth 30, 40, 50% more, maybe even more than that, just by making it into that third-party graders holder. So something I'm considering. If I do that, I will definitely follow up with another video. Some interesting, fascinating early bullion, keeping that powder dry, but when I see something that is truly exceptional, I still have no problem picking it up. And that leads me to these pieces over here. These are interesting. Have you ever seen one of these before? This is a tiny little 1 troy ounce silver bar, and it's an ingot form. There's something just really kind of cool about that. You see the beveled edges and everything. These were also part of an old inventory that one of my local dealers had. They claimed that they had showed these to me years ago. I swear I don't remember having seen them, but I suppose my taste in early bullion might be changing a little bit, because when I saw these, I definitely wanted to buy them. What do we know about these? I didn't really know it at the time, but these pieces are made by a company called Delta Smelting. I know that's a tongue twister, and I'll probably manage to mess it up. You can find invaluable information on Vintage Poured Bar about these. One of their former employees, I'm talking about Delta Smelting, the gentleman's name is Keith Law, has an amazing memory and took amazing photographs of all of the things that he was working on. And when he worked for Delta Smelting a long, long time ago, we're talking about 1969, and he's made several posts on Vintage Poured Bar talking about his experience. This is really important because, believe it or not, we just don't have that much documentation about how early 1970-ish era silver bars were made. If we think about a refinery like Englehard even, it's been a kind of a quest of people to find some photographic evidence of them pouring these old par silver bars. But fortunately, Mr. Law kept really good records. He's got a great memory, and he's got images of some of the things that he did. I'll put a link down below, a fascinating story to tell. He started with them in 1969. Prior to that, Delta Smelting was known as United Research and Development. So they were more of a raw material where miners would bring their ore and have it assayed and clarified. But they kind of shifted focus to making silver ingots, silver bullion, as this kind of took off around the world. It happened in America with those California companies. It also happened in Canada. These are Canadian bars. So they began producing these bars, and according to Mr. Law, he made about 70% of the Delta Smelting bars that we see now. Delta Smelting made pieces from 1 ounce all the way up to about 100 ounces. You can find them in all sorts of shapes and sizes. They are collectible, but it's the larger bars not quite as collectible as the smaller bars. And these 1 ounce bars, especially scarce. These are very rare pieces and they are very sought after. What do we know about them? These pieces have on the reverse of them, on the back of them, this device. And what you're seeing there is it says BC Centennial. It's a little bit hard to make out. And there's a little bit of a flower form. What are we looking at? According, once again, to Mr. Law and the VintagePouredBar.com website, for those wondering what the hallmark on the reverse of the bar is, it's a dogwood blossom that grows in British Columbia. The blossom of the western flowering dogwood is the floral emblem of British Columbia, though it's usually depicted with 5 of these small bracts. That's what they're called, these little flower-like devices here. 5 of these. It doesn't usually have that in nature. I think it's really just kind of an extension of what they're supposed to be like. But these pieces were made to celebrate the 100th anniversary of British Columbia. So while the 1 ounce bars and the 1 ounce sizes are quite scarce for Delta Smelting, these BC Centennial pieces are incredibly rare. And my dealer just happened to have a group of them. I was able to pick them up. I didn't know how scarce they were at the time. They just spoke to me. And sometimes going with your gut pays off. How much are these worth? I know everybody's always asking, what are they worth? What did you pay for them? What are they worth? I paid a little bit of a premium, but not too much. But check out how much these pieces are selling for. Now, we talked before about the price of silver being considerably higher. And just as a really rough illustration, if we go back maybe a year or two ago and you found a nice vintage silver 1 ounce bar, with silver at $25 an ounce, you could expect to pay maybe as much as $50 for that silver bar. Clearly, there are some very, very rare pieces that would have sold for more than that, but just as an illustration, roughly 50% or 100% of the value of the silver from $25 to $50. Now that we see silver in that 65-ish price range, and it's going higher right now as I speak, you wouldn't expect to double that price. The premiums typically kind of hang back a little bit. So maybe a $10 or $15 or $20 premium per ounce, but certainly not double what it was when silver was a lot lower. That doesn't seem to be the case with these Delta Smelting bars. So you're looking at some recently closed auctions for these pieces before the price really took off in this last little jaunt that we've seen with silver. And you can see how much people are paying for these 1 ounce class Delta Smelting BC Centennial bars. Is that incredible? Is that amazing? I had never known anything about these pieces. I recognized the maker's mark. I thought they were interesting. So thrilled to be able to add these. That's why they are kind of number 1 if we're numbering these from left to right in the pieces that I picked up this quarter. You have to let me know what you think about these pieces. I think they're really, really cool. And finally, for my Canadian subscribers, I've got something kind of exciting that I get to share with you guys. Glad to have these pieces in the stack. So those are the pieces that I purchased this quarter, but I do have one other tale I figured I'd throw in. For you guys who remember, who have been subscribers to the channel, all the way back to my 6,000 subscriber giveaway, that actually happened earlier this year too, not in this quarter though, I was able to pick up several of these special 1 ounce silver medallions. These were made by Landis Studios, and these were designed by a gentleman named Ron Landis. Ron took ill earlier this year and he has since passed away. So it's particularly interesting that I was able to get a selection of these pieces, and you're seeing the front of this is kind of the American Indian head buffalo kind of nickel obverse. Landis Studios were kind enough to include a small star privy mark. That's what I'm calling it, at least anyway. And they numbered these pieces. I gave away 6 of them for the 6,000 subscriber giveaway, and I kept one myself also. But what's really cool about these pieces, you flip it over and you see this amazing skull character. I think that's really neat with all the information about the size, the weight, the purity of this. Just a really interesting, fascinating, unexpected kind of silver round. And I like the unexpected. I like something that's a little bit spooky sometimes. So that was my 6,000 subscriber giveaway. I was perusing heritage auctions, something that you guys know that I do periodically. And in a recent auction, they had examples of hobo nickels. What is a hobo nickel? Really briefly, the American buffalo nickel or the Indian head nickel issued from 1913 to 1937. That just happened to correspond with a difficult era of economics in the United States of America. You had a lot of people who were out of work or underemployed. You had a lot of people who are homeless or near homeless. And a lot of those folks who were kind of transitioning from one part of the country to another as they were looking for jobs were sometimes called hobos. That's a little bit derogatory, but I think they kind of embraced that name. And some of them, especially if they had skills acquired during World War I or earlier in their lives, would take these buffalo nickels, that was just the circulating nickel at the time, and they would carve them to give them a different appearance. Sometimes they would make the Indian on the front of these look like themselves, kind of a hobo with a little bit of 5 o'clock shadow, bags under their eyes, or they would make them look like a politician. Some of them were incredibly skillful. Sometimes they would use the reverse of the nickel with the buffalo on it, make it look like a mule or a donkey or a horse or some other kind of animal, maybe an elephant. And if this took them 2 or 3 hours to carve these pieces, the idea was that sometimes if they didn't have enough food to eat, they could exchange this nickel with their effort put into it for maybe a dime, and that might be enough to buy them dinner for the evening or even their family dinner for the evening. And I think sometimes it was probably just the case that they were proud, and rightfully so, and they didn't want to take charity. So by using these as almost a way to show people that they were trying, that people would kind of take pity on them a little bit and buy these for maybe a dime, maybe a quarter, give them a little bit of hope. And I think there's something kind of fascinating about this. I've never really collected them. I've known about them for a long time. Perusing this heritage auction, I came across one of these nickels, and it was made by Ron Landis. Ron is considered kind of a gem in the numismatic community. He's done all sorts of interesting things in his life and his career, and he should be celebrated. But this piece in particular hit me because, as you're seeing here, it looked a lot like the reverse of the pieces that I was able to give away for the 6,000 subscriber giveaway. This was a motif that he used quite often. I should stop and say that if you are interested in the hobo nickels, there are lots of modern reproductions of them. How do you judge the quality of these pieces? The fact is that we have so many buffalo nickels that were issued that are in pretty poor condition that people have taken them to shipping them overseas, where you have varying degrees of skillful artists who will carve them into something that looks like a buffalo or a hobo nickel that was made in the 1930s, maybe the 1940s, ship them back to America and sell them to collectors. If you know that's what they are, that's fine. But if you buy them thinking that it's really something that's coming up on 100 years old, it's easy to be deceived by these pieces. In this case, Ron had actually put his initials on this piece. This was something he was kind of known for. He put the date on it, and he actually numbered this piece too. So when I saw this piece with a Ron Landis connection, when it looked like one of the pieces that I had just given away from Landis Studio, I wanted to own this piece. So I dropped a bid on it that I thought was nuclear at the time. I think it was bid up to $65 or $70. So I doubled that bid. This was literally a day before the auction hit. So I thought there was a really good chance I was going to walk away with this piece. I should mention that Landis Studios is still very much alive and well. They're doing quite well. The gentleman who was kind of behind the studio, once Ron started taking ill, has been running it and running it very well, and it's his intention to continue to run it and add to it. So if you're interested, I will definitely put a link to Landis Studios down below. Spoiler alert, we will be using them for another giveaway very soon. So I bid on this piece just a few hours before the auction closed. I thought I had bid a nuclear bid on it, and when the auction closed, this piece sold for $600. A bittersweet loss. There was such a strong connection to what my experience with Landis Studios would have been. I thought this would be a great thing to add to this kind of growing Landis Studio connection. I thought it would be a really nice piece to have. But in some ways, I'm almost happy. This is the numismatic community kind of recognizing that Ron Landis was a very skilled person who did a lot of interesting things in our community, and people appreciate that. Now that he is gone, there is definitely a demand for these pieces. I got blown out of the water on this piece. This was multiples of what my high bid was, and I thought that I was actually pretty safe with that bid. So a little bit of a bittersweet loss. It's sad that I wasn't able to add this piece to my collection, but at the same time, it's nice to see that recognition that Ron Landis is getting for all of the things that he did within the numismatic community. My fourth quarter 2025 update. Let me know which of these pieces you think is the neatest. If you don't think any of them are worthwhile, I totally get it. My tastes are a little bit strange. But I like having these pieces that I've been working on for a long time. Some of these pieces are a little bit more interesting than others. Just because these pieces are especially valuable doesn't necessarily mean they're the best pieces that I've picked up this quarter. Let me know what your favorite piece is. I'd love to hear it. If you have questions about anything that we talked about, by all means leave a question down below. If you've got a question, there's a good chance somebody else has a question. Let's see if we can answer it for everybody. I typically premiere my videos, my brand new videos, on Friday evenings. Maybe you are watching this video with me on a Friday night. If you are, definitely say hi in the dialog box on the right side of the screen. We've been having a conversation about these pieces as this video has been premiering. But I want you to come to the live stream that will follow this premiere. I generally have a live stream. This is just an opportunity to speak live with me on YouTube, ask questions, make comments. We usually talk about what we just talked about in the premiere video that happened before the live stream, but we open up the floor. As long as it's coin or bullion related, you're welcome to make comments, ask questions. It's a great way to meet other people, especially other YouTubers in the community, because we do come to each other's live streams quite often. So definitely join me for the live stream, and the way that you can find out about those premiere videos in the live stream is by clicking the notification bell, and that will tell you when I'm getting ready to have a premiere and a live stream. Great way to subscribe. Hit that notification bell as well. I like to end my videos by saying always be learning, and thank you for allowing me to be a part of your journey as we go deeper into the world of coins and physical precious metals.